The business class cabin was filled with a soft hum of voices and dimmed light. Passengers had already settled into their seats. Some leafed through magazines. Others checked their emails, while a few dozed in the half-light. Everything seemed calm until one scene disrupted the measured flow of the flight. In the aisle between the rows stood a black woman in an elegant suit. She held her boarding pass neatly folded and confidently took her seat by the window. But beside her stood a flight attendant, a young woman with perfectly styled hair and a practiced smile, which had now vanished. "Excuse me, ma'am." Her voice was steady but tinged with suspicion. "You may have made a mistake. This seat is reserved for business class passengers." "I'm perfectly aware of that," the woman replied calmly, without even lifting her eyes as she fastened her seatbelt. The flight attendant frowned. She stepped closer and, lowering her voice just enough for the nearby passengers to hear, whispered, "I'm afraid you're using someone else's ticket." The cabin grew noisier. Several people looked up, watching with interest. One man in a suit smirked and muttered, "Always the same thing?" The woman in the seat lifted her gaze. There was no fear or embarrassment in her eyes, only a cold calm. "I have my own ticket. Everything is in order." But the flight attendant didn't back down. She gestured to a colleague, a tall male steward who walked over. "What's the problem?" he asked, looking at the passenger as though he were already certain she was guilty. The flight attendant hesitated, choosing her words. "She may have forged the ticket. It needs to be checked." The passengers stirred with excitement. Someone pulled out a phone and turned on the camera. A young guy, about 20, said loudly, "Hey, let's stream this live and see how it ends." Several passengers laughed in support. The tension was rising. The woman slowly took her ticket and passport out of her purse and handed them to the steward. He glanced at them but carelessly tossed back, "This proves nothing. I'll call the shift supervisor." She didn't move. It felt as if time had frozen. Passengers silently placed their bets in their heads on who would turn out to be right. When the senior flight attendant arrived, the situation only worsened. Her voice carried strict authority. "Ma'am, you need to leave this cabin and move to economy. We will verify your identity separately." "I'm not going anywhere." Her voice was soft but firm. "My seat is here." At that moment, voices rose nearby. Several passengers began openly commenting, "Why is she arguing? If everything was legit, she would have left already." "She's a fraud, 100%. Phones in people's hands recorded every word, every gesture. In the live stream run by the young man, dozens of comments were already appearing. "Throw her out." "Shame. That's what happens when you steal tickets." The steward, losing patience, leaned toward the woman and said sharply, "Either you get up yourself or we'll use force." He reached his hand toward her shoulder, but the woman only looked at him calmly. There was such certainty in her gaze that the steward froze, as though he had encountered something greater than himself. "You are making a mistake," she said quietly. Those words only fueled the commotion. Some passengers joined in. "Come on, get her out. She's delaying the flight." The senior flight attendant gestured for her colleague to drag the passenger out. At that moment, the tension peaked. Two crew members leaned over the woman, ready to force her from her seat, while the passengers waited for the outcome, some with excitement, others with outrage. But she remained seated, calm as ever, as if she already knew that the end of this scene would be nothing like what the others expected. The air in the cabin seemed to thicken, becoming heavy and viscous. The flight attendant, whose hand was already inches from the woman's shoulder, froze for a moment, but the sharp look of his supervisor spurred him on. He had to act immediately. He reached for the passenger again, this time with determination. "Stand up," he said loudly, so that everyone could hear. "You're holding up the flight." The woman didn't move. Her calmness irritated them more than any shouts or excuses. It was as if her composure exposed the weakness of the accusations themselves. "We cannot tolerate imposters in business class," the senior flight attendant added, raising her voice. This is a security violation. The crowd of passengers stirred. Some whispered, others watched with curiosity, and one elderly man said loudly, "Why are you wasting time with her? If the ticket is fake, throw her off at the next airport." The remark was met with approving murmurs, like a stadium audience cheering on their team. The young blogger, still live streaming, whispered excitedly into his phone, "Guys, this is insane. We're at 20,000 viewers online. Watch, they're really going to kick her out." Passengers sitting nearby exchanged glances. Some smirked, others shook their heads. Meanwhile, the woman once again held out her documents, insisting, "Here is my ticket. Here is my passport. Check them again." The steward snatched the papers almost roughly, glanced at them briefly, and stubbornly shook his head. "We cannot confirm their authenticity." "That's a lie," protested a passenger in a grey suit 2 rows away. "I saw her at check-in. She was cleared without any problem." All heads turned toward him, but the senior flight attendant replied coldly, "Sir, please don't interfere. The situation is under control." "Under control?" The man threw up his hands. "You're humiliating her only because of her skin color." The cabin noise grew louder. Some shushed him. "Sit down. It's none of your business." Others nodded in agreement. A line of division cut right through the cabin. Half supported the crew, half began to doubt. The senior flight attendant radioed the security officer stationed with the crew. A moment later, a stocky man in uniform with a stern expression appeared. "What's the problem?" he asked dryly. The steward and attendant both spoke at once. "Suspicion of fraud, fake ticket, refusal to follow crew instructions." The security officer nodded and stepped toward the woman. "Stand up, ma'am. If you refuse, we will use force." At that moment, several phones clicked simultaneously, capturing close-ups. The live stream comments exploded. Some demanded justice and expulsion, others wrote, "This is racism live on camera." The woman raised her head, her voice steady and firm. "You are making a serious mistake." For a second, silence hung in the air. The security officer stepped closer, placing his hand on the armrest of her seat. "You don't get to decide, ma'am. You're delaying the flight." Someone among the passengers jumped to their feet. "Leave her alone. She did nothing wrong." "She has everything fake," shouted a woman from the back. "Look at her. She's not even nervous, as if she knows she'll get away with it." The cabin turned into an arena. Passengers argued, pointing fingers, shouting accusations or words of defense. A few tried to form a human shield around the woman, while others demanded harsher measures. The captain, having been informed of the conflict, entered the cabin. His presence briefly calmed everyone. "Silence!" His voice cut through the noise. "Explain what is happening." The senior flight attendant quickly reported, framing the situation as if it were a simple violator of rules. The captain nodded, then turned to the woman. "Ma'am, if your documents are valid, you have no reason to refuse to come with me." She looked straight into his eyes. There was something in her gaze that made the captain pause for a second. But he quickly regained his strict demeanor. "You either come with me voluntarily or by force," he said firmly. The woman rose slowly. The atmosphere in the cabin grew taut to the breaking point. Some sighed with relief, others with triumph. But her calmness only raised more questions. As she stepped forward, one passenger shouted, "Look, she's not afraid at all. Who is she really?" The crowd buzzed. Phones kept recording. The conflict had grown beyond a simple misunderstanding on board. It was becoming a public scandal that could not be hushed up. The young blogger's phone trembled in his hands from the flood of notifications. The screen flashed with dozens of comments, and the viewers kept multiplying. 20,000, 30, 40. The numbers climbed every second. He had even forgotten about his own flight. This was his chance to become famous. "Guys, you won't believe this," he whispered excitedly into the camera. "It's about to be decided." He zoomed in on every gesture of the flight attendants and the woman. The comments poured in non-stop. "This is pure racism." "Throw her out. She's disgracing business class." She looks way too confident. Who is she? I'm calling the media. Let's get them involved. The cabin buzzed like a beehive. Passengers weren't just spectators anymore. They had become part of the event. Some stood up to get a better view, others argued with each other, and a few started their own live streams. The woman still stood calmly by her seat, motionless, her gaze fixed directly on the captain, and even he found it unnerving. "We cannot delay the flight," the captain said, trying to keep his voice firm. "Either you move to another cabin, or we'll call the police at the airport." The mention of police set off an uproar. "Police? For what?" shouted the man in the grey suit. "She showed her ticket and passport. Are you blind?" "Because she—" The flight attendant cut in, but stumbled, realizing she had no real proof. "Because the documents look suspicious." "The only suspicious thing here is your behavior," someone shouted from the back. The argument instantly spiraled out of control. Two women in neighbouring seats started yelling at each other, one demanding the passenger be thrown off, the other calling the whole thing a disgrace. Security tried to calm them, but the noise only grew louder. The blogger's phone showed a new record: 100,000 viewers online. The comments read, "We're launching a hashtag, Justice on Board. This will hit the evening news." She's definitely not an ordinary woman too calm for all this. One passenger, seeing the scrolling comments on his own phone, read them aloud. The crowd grew even more agitated, realizing they were no longer just witnesses. They were part of a global show the whole world was now watching. The captain cursed under his breath. He knew that any wrong move could be catastrophic for the company's reputation. But retreat wasn't an option either. Regulations demanded strict action when violations were suspected. "Security," he said at last. "Remove her." The strong man in uniform stepped forward and placed a hand on the woman's shoulder. But once again she spoke, calm and almost icy. "You don't understand what this will lead to." The words struck so deeply that even the passengers went silent for a second. The man hesitated, fingers tightening on her shoulder, but when he looked into her eyes, he unexpectedly withdrew his hand. "What does this mean?" the flight attendant cried out. "Why did you stop?" He faltered. "I'm not sure it's right to touch her." "This is nonsense," one of the passengers exploded. "We're losing time because of her." The cabin roared again. Some shouted, some whistled. The young blogger, glued to his phone, narrated breathlessly, "Guys, did you see that? Even security is afraid. Something's definitely off here." The viewers hit 200,000. Hashtags spread across social networks. Some users wrote they were already calling newsrooms. The atmosphere kept heating up. The crew argued among themselves right there in the aisle. Some demanded she be dragged out. Others were starting to doubt. Their division only fueled the chaos. One passenger shouted loudly, "If you don't end this circus, I'll file a complaint with the airline. This is discrimination." Another yelled in response, "Complaint? I'll help throw her out myself." And stepping forward, he reached toward the woman, but the cold look she gave him stopped him in his tracks, as if he had hit an invisible wall. He froze and backed away. The blogger's phone now showed 300,000 viewers. The senior flight attendant, her voice trembling, turned to the captain. "We need a decision. Now." The captain pressed his lips tightly. He knew this had gone far beyond a routine onboard incident. Every word he spoke would be recorded, spread, ripped out of context. "We're contacting the airline," he finally said, "and waiting for instructions." The woman smiled faintly for the first time. It was light, almost imperceptible, but it set off a storm of reactions in the cabin. Why is she smiling? She clearly knows something. Who even is she? Phones captured every second, and the outside world was now opening its eyes wider and wider to what was happening. The noise in the cabin reached its peak. People argued, shouted, some cursed, others defended the woman. The live stream already had hundreds of thousands of viewers, with comments flashing by too fast to read. 500,000 already! The blogger almost shouted, pointing his camera at the scene. "This is insane, guys! Don't go anywhere!" The captain tried to keep control, but his voice was drowned out by the roar of the crowd. The senior flight attendant was visibly nervous, and at that moment, one of her colleagues, a young steward with sharp movements and tightly pressed lips, lost his patience. "Enough already," he snapped angrily. "We're calling the police and she's out." He stepped toward the woman, grabbed her arm, and yanked hard, trying to force her up. She kept her balance, only leaning slightly to the side. Instead of letting go, the steward shoved her in the chest. The woman staggered, hitting the armrest of her seat. A wave of outrage rolled through the cabin. "What are you doing?" An elderly passenger cried, leaping to her feet. "Did you see that? He shoved her!" shouted the man in the grey suit, filming with his phone. Some applauded, others were horrified. The cabin had become a chaotic arena where everyone felt like a judge. "Good for him," yelled a man from the back. "Get her out." "That's assault." A young woman across the aisle shouted, "You're violating her rights." Dozens of phones shot up above people's heads, recording everything. The blogger, trembling with excitement, narrated breathlessly, "Did you see that? He actually shoved her. This is total madness. 1 million viewers online, 1 million. Can you believe it?" The woman, however, neither raised her voice nor panicked. She simply straightened slowly, brushed off her sleeve, and looked the steward straight in the eyes. Her gaze carried no anger, only calm, certainty, and something terrifyingly unyielding. For a second, the steward seemed unsettled. He looked away, but his senior colleague pushed him on. "Don't stop! We have to remove her!" But now the crowd was against them. Several passengers stood up and positioned themselves between the steward and the woman. "We won't let you touch her," said a middle-aged man, shielding the passenger. "Step aside," the flight attendant shouted. "This is a crew order." "Your orders are illegal," replied a woman in glasses, holding her phone directly in the steward's face. "The whole world can already see what you're doing." Livestream comments exploded. "Shoving a woman? That's a criminal act. I'm calling the police right now. Fire them immediately." Why is she so calm? That's the scariest part. The captain stepped forward, his face flushed red. He knew everything was spiraling out of control. "Everyone sit down, immediately," he shouted. "Otherwise we cannot continue the flight." But the passengers didn't listen. Some cheered for the woman, others egged on the crew, and it seemed that at any moment a fight could break out. The woman, however, remained motionless, as if nothing around her mattered. Her composure now felt like a direct challenge, a silent accusation. "She's provoking us on purpose," the flight attendant snapped. "This is all staged." "Staged?" the man in the grey suit shouted back. "The only thing staged here is your behaviour." The crowd roared again. Some clapped, some whistled, and the live stream showed the number 2 million viewers. The blogger was almost in tears with excitement. 2 million, guys. This is the end of these stewards' careers. At that moment, the steward who had shoved the woman tried once more to grab her arm, but the passengers formed a tight circle around her. "You won't lay a hand on her," said an older man with grey hair firmly. "Step aside," the senior flight attendant screamed. "You're interfering with the crew's work." The captain, realizing he had lost control, grabbed his radio. "Notify dispatch immediately. We're requesting an emergency landing." Those words set off another uproar. "What? For this?" someone protested. "We'll be stranded in the middle of nowhere." "Better stranded than tolerating this injustice," another shouted. The woman smiled faintly, not triumphantly, rather with a hint of understanding, as if everything happening was inevitable. The crowd buzzed around her. Phones captured every move, and beyond the plane, the story was already turning into a global sensation. The cabin resembled a boiling cauldron. Passengers argued, phones kept recording, and live-stream comments flew by in the thousands every second too fast to read. The flight attendants tried to restore order, but every gesture they made was met with shouts and protests. Amid the cacophony, a voice suddenly rang out, calm, steady, confident. It belonged to a man in his 50s, dressed in an expensive suit with silver watch on his wrist. He had been silent until now, quietly observing from his window seat. "Excuse me," he said loudly, cutting through the noise. "I think I know this woman." Silence fell over the cabin. Even the blogger looked up from his phone in surprise. "What do you mean?" the captain asked cautiously. The man in the suit stood, adjusted his tie slightly, and looked directly at the woman. She met his gaze calmly, without a word. "I've seen her photograph," he continued, "a few months ago, in a business magazine. It spoke about—" He hesitated, glancing at the crowd. "A person of very high status." The cabin erupted. "Yeah, right. Another fairy tale. Sure, a magazine. Maybe she was in Hollywood too. This is staged. He's her accomplice." The captain frowned. "Can you prove what you're saying?" "Yes." The man pulled out his phone, frantically scrolling through his gallery. "I even saved a copy of the article." The woman tilted her head slightly, as if amused by the scene. When the passenger finally found the image, he held his phone out. On the screen was indeed a black and white magazine cover with a large portrait of a woman strikingly similar to the passenger. "See?" he said triumphantly. "That's her." For a second, everyone froze. Then came a wave of outraged voices. "That's photoshopped. She just looks similar. You're in on it with her." Hi, even the steward who had shoved the woman earlier smirked. "How convenient. In any situation, you can just say the person is important. We're not buying it." "I don't ask you to believe," the man in the suit replied firmly. "I demand a proper check." But his words were drowned in the roar. Some passengers whistled, others laughed. The blogger zoomed in on the woman again, narrating, "Guys, check this out. Some dude is saying she's some VIP, but nobody believes him. Write in the chat truth or scam." The comments exploded again. Some viewers swore they recognized her. Others dismissed it as staged hype. The captain pressed his lips tightly. To him, the situation was a trap. On one hand, a passenger was hinting that this was no ordinary woman. On the other, protocol demanded that the crew ignore rumors and act by the book. "Enough," he said sharply. "We have no confirmation. Everyone stay seated. We proceed according to protocol." The woman smiled faintly, but stayed silent. The man in the suit raised his voice again. "You're making a huge mistake." "Sit down," the senior flight attendant snapped. "Your assumptions mean nothing." He tried to argue, but the crowd's noise cut him off. People laughed at him. Some called him crazy. Through it all, the woman remained composed. She neither confirmed nor denied the man's words. Her silence spoke louder than any argument. The blogger, thrilled by the drama, whispered into his phone, "This is wild. Some say she's powerful, others laugh it off. Nobody believes it. But you know what? There's something in her eyes." The stream hit 3 million viewers. The cabin was now fully divided. Some demanded her identity be checked, others mocked the idea as a circus. "Check her!" the flight attendant shouted. "That's absurd. We won't let some imposter take control of this flight." "And what if she's not an imposter?" the man in the suit asked again. But his words were swallowed by the noise. The situation had slipped beyond control once more. The crew argued among themselves, passengers bickered, online viewers fanned the flames. And in the middle of the chaos stood the woman, unmoving, like a stone in a rushing river, forcing the waves to break against her calm. And the more they argued, the clearer it became. Her true identity might turn everything upside down. But for now, no one was ready to believe. The cabin buzzed like a hive struck by a stone. The roar of voices grew louder, and it felt as if the plane's walls could not withstand the tension. After the passenger in the suit declared that he recognized the woman, the situation spun completely out of control. "You're lying!" an elderly passenger from the back row shouted, pointing her finger. "She's a fraud, and you're covering for her." "That's not a lie," the man in the suit snapped back. "I swear I saw her in that magazine." The crowd split. Some supported him, others mocked him. Some clapped like at an arena, others demanded justice. The senior flight attendant had turned pale. She tried to shout over the passengers, "Everyone sit down immediately, otherwise I'll be forced to take action." But her words drowned in the roar. Phones kept filming, and the blogger was nearly ecstatic. "Guys, are you seeing this? A real mutiny. We're at 4 million viewers live." The woman stood in the middle of the chaos like a quiet island in a storm. She hadn't spoken a word, and that silence drove everyone mad. Her calmness seemed like a challenge to the crew, to the passengers, to the viewers. "If she won't leave," a man in a checkered shirt yelled, "we'll drag her out ourselves." He stepped forward, but another passenger. The grey-haired man who had defended her earlier blocked his way. "Try it," he said firmly, locking eyes with him. "Get out of the way!" the man in the shirt shouted. "Because of her, we'll be stuck in the air." "Because of her?" a young woman with a phone interjected. "It's because of you. Can't you see how she's being treated?" Another argument flared, this time with shoves and grabs. Someone seized another by the shoulder, someone else pushed forward. The captain, losing patience, shouted so loudly that the cabin fell silent for a moment. "Everyone stay in your seats. That's an order." But the silence lasted only seconds. A hand snatched someone's phone. The sound of glass cracked. The screen shattered. A woman screamed. The grey-haired man shoved the attacker, and a brawl began. The crew rushed to break it up, but were swept into the chaos themselves. One steward tried to restrain a passenger, while another yelled into the radio, "We're losing control. Repeat, the situation is out of control." In the live stream, comments raged, "This isn't just a scandal, it's a mutiny on board. Where's the police? Where's security? Why is she still silent?" Viewers passed 5 million. The woman had retreated slightly toward her seat, her eyes calmly scanning the chaos. There was no fear, no panic. She seemed like someone watching a play, already knowing the ending. The passenger in the suit shouted again, "Wake up! You don't understand who she is. If anything happens to her, the consequences will be catastrophic." "Enough lies!" the flight attendant barked. "You're just covering for an imposter." The crowd exploded again. Some yelled, "Yes, that's right, yeah." Others booed and hissed. Suddenly, a tall man in a sports jacket climbed onto a seat and shouted, "Let's decide. Who wants her removed? Raise your hands." Part of the cabin raised their hands, while the other side screamed, "Shame! This is a lynching!" New fights broke out across the cabin. The captain, seeing it, grabbed his head. "We're requesting an emergency landing," he shouted into the radio again. "Immediately!" The blogger's phone showed a new record, 7 million viewers. The comments streamed so fast they were unreadable. "This is a global scandal," one passenger whispered. "No," the man in the suit replied, staring at the woman. "This is only the beginning." She smiled faintly, barely perceptibly. That small smile ignited the noise even more. Some saw it as defiance, others as confidence, still others as proof that she truly was someone special. But no one was ready to believe completely yet. The plane throbbed with voices, as though the machine itself was flying on a wave of human anger and distrust. And at the center of it all, she remained silent, calm, as if she knew the truth was about to be revealed, but only when the world was ready to hear it. The announcement of an emergency landing came across the speakers dry and cold, like a sentence. "Dear passengers," the captain's voice echoed through the cabin. "Due to technical reasons, this aircraft will make an emergency landing at the nearest airport. Please remain calm and stay in your seats." But there was no calm. The cabin had become a boiling cauldron. Some passengers clapped loudly, cheering that the intruder would finally be taken off. Others shouted about injustice and demanded the abuse be stopped. The blogger with his phone was ecstatic. "Guys, we're landing. The police are already waiting. This is a world record. 10 million people are watching live." Comments flooded in non-stop. "Don't hand her to the police. The stewards must answer for this. She's clearly someone important. Look at how she carries herself. No way this is an accident. It's staged." Meanwhile, the crew tried to maintain order. The senior flight attendant barked commands. "Everyone stay in your seats. Security will deal with the woman immediately after landing." But several passengers stood and formed a protective circle around her. Among them were the grey-haired man, the girl with her phone, and 3 others who had firmly taken her side. "We won't let you touch her," the man declared. "You've gone too far. Remove them." The flight attendant screamed to her colleagues, "This is interfering with crew operations." But her colleagues hesitated. One steward whispered to another, "Listen, what if it's true? What if she really is someone important? We'll ruin our careers." "Shut up," hissed the other. "An order is an order." The plane began to descend. The shrill sound of warning chimes, the rattling frame, the thud of turbulence everyone knew. In minutes, they would be on the ground. And then flashes. Outside, they were already waiting. Through the windows, bright headlights and flashing beacons could be seen. Police cars lined the runway, and farther back stood crowds of people with cameras. "My God, it's the press!" A girl by the window gasped. "Of course it's the press," the man in the suit said quietly. "This story has already gone worldwide." The wheels hit the runway. The plane jolted violently. People screamed, some in fear, others in excitement. The live stream counter exploded. 15 million viewers. As soon as the plane stopped, a stair truck pulled up to the door. Policemen with stone-faced expressions boarded swiftly. "Where is the passenger?" their leader asked. The flight attendant pointed firmly at the woman. "There, suspected of fraud and forged documents." The cabin erupted. "Lies! Don't you dare touch her! Just take her already. Enough wasting time." The woman stood as calmly as ever, her hands folded before her, her face free of any fear. The police advanced, but the defending passengers blocked their way. "You have no right," the grey-haired man said firmly. "This is assault. Everything is being live-streamed." "Step aside, sir," the officer ordered. "Do not interfere." At that moment, a journalist outside broke through closer to the stairs and shouted, "We know who she is! It's a sensation!" The passengers gasped. All eyes turned to the woman, but she did not flinch. Her silence was her weapon. "Who is she?" the flight attendant screamed. "Tell us." "Not now," the journalist replied. "But the whole world is already searching for confirmation." Panic swept the cabin. Some yelled it was a hoax, others demanded her documents be checked immediately. Still others cried that the crew's careers were finished. The captain stepped forward, his face grim. "We are handing her over to the police. The rest is not our concern." The officers moved again, but the passengers closed ranks tighter, forming a living wall around her. "No one believes you!" the girl with the phone shouted. "We won't allow it!" The live stream showed 20 million viewers. Comments flashed like lightning. "Stop the flight! Don't hand her over! The crew must answer for this! Who is she? Tell us already!" But the woman remained silent. Her eyes radiated calm certainty, as if she knew the true moment of revelation was still ahead. And the harder the police pressed, the louder the passengers argued, the clearer it became. This story would not end with a landing. It was only the beginning of a far greater scandal, one that would change not only the fate of these people, but the reputation of the entire airline. The police officers in uniform had almost closed in around the woman. The grey-haired man and several other passengers stood before her, shielding her from any action. The cabin was a roar, voices merging into a single wave of sound. People shouted, argued, filmed, screamed hashtags. The captain clutched his radio again, sweat gleaming on his face. "We are ready to hand the passenger over to the police. Please confirm instructions." A second of silence. Only the turbines and the angry voices of passengers. Then a cold, precise voice of the ground dispatcher came through the speakers. "Orders have changed. Immediately cease all actions against the passenger. Her status requires special handling. I repeat, do not touch her." The captain went pale. "What does special handling mean?" whispered the senior flight attendant. "It's an order from above," replied the dispatcher. "This is not up for discussion." The words hit like a thunderclap, and the cabin fell into heavy silence. Even those who had been shouting seconds ago now stared at each other in shock. "You're joking?" The steward who had shoved her earlier stammered. "We're supposed to just leave her?" "This is impossible," the police officer interjected. "She is suspected of violations." "You are ordered to stand down," the voice from the speaker said coldly. The crowd gasped. "What do you mean, don't touch her? Is she untouchable?" "This is insane." "I knew it. Everything's bought off." The blogger's voice trembled as he whispered into the camera. "Did you hear that, guys? Orders from above, she can't be touched. We're at 25 million online." Livestream comments exploded. "She's definitely someone powerful. This is pure corruption. Zoom in on her face." The passenger in the suit, the first to claim he knew her, lifted his hands. "I told you, she's not who you think she is." But the crowd split once more. "You're lying," shouted the man in the checkered shirt. "No one will ever tell us the truth." "Then she really is important," yelled the girl with the phone, "and all of you tried to humiliate her." The police exchanged looks. Their faces stayed stone cold, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in their eyes. The chief leaned toward the captain and said quietly, but loud enough for nearby passengers to hear, "We've been ordered to back off. If we continue, we lose our jobs." The words spread instantly. The crowd roared again. "So the company itself protects her. It's a conspiracy? This is the proof." And the woman still stood silently, eyes fixed on the window, as if none of it concerned her. The senior flight attendant turned even paler. She stepped forward and shouted, "This is unfair. We were only doing our duty. How can they order us to just step aside?" "Step aside," the captain repeated, shoulders sagging. "We have no choice." The words fell like a sentence on the crew. The flight attendants exchanged bewildered glances. Those who moments earlier had been ready to drag the woman away by force now stood frozen. The passengers erupted. Some whistled, some clapped, others hurled curses at the airline. The live stream counter surged to 30 million viewers. "Guys, this is the story of the century!" The blogger's voice shook. "Orders from above, she cannot be touched." The man in the suit looked at the woman and spoke quietly, but loud enough to be heard. "I understand why they're afraid. But you're still silent. Why?" She turned her head slightly, her eyes glinting. But she remained silent, and that silence was louder than any answer. The emergency landing had already made the flight a sensation, but when the doors opened and the first journalists flooded up the stairs with cameras and microphones, the cabin truly became an arena. Camera flashes blinded the passengers. Shouts mixed with the commanding voices of police and crew. Reporters squeezed past the human wall of security, forcing their way inside. "We need to record everything," one shouted. "Make way! This is a global event," cried another. One cameraman stretched his lens straight into the cabin, and for the first time millions of viewers worldwide saw the scene through the eyes of the press. "Where is the woman?" someone yelled. "Show her." The senior flight attendant snapped, "Leave the aircraft immediately. You have no right to interfere." But her voice was lost in the chaos. The police tried to stop the reporters, but the crowd outside pressed forward, and every step brought the cameras closer to the center of the storm. The woman sat in her seat, unmoving, as though the dozens of cameras weren't aimed at her. Her face was calm, her eyes steady. "Madam," a journalist shouted, thrusting a microphone toward her. "Is it true you represent a major corporation?" She did not answer. "Madam, do you deny the accusations?" Another pressed. Silence. The passengers shouted at one another. "See? If she were honest, she'd say something." "She doesn't owe you anything. Can't you see the harassment?" Passengers' phones and journalists' cameras merged into a blinding wall of light. The blogger, trembling with excitement, kept streaming. "Guys, this is unbelievable. Journalists are storming in right now. 27 million viewers. This is a world record for live streams. The man in the suit, who had first claimed to recognize her, stood between her and the reporters. "Leave her alone. You don't even understand what you're doing." "And who are you?" Reporters pounced. "Why are you defending her? Are you connected to her too?" The man raised his hands. "I'm just a witness. I saw her in a business magazine. I know she's not who you think she is." The cabin erupted. Some passengers applauded, others banged on armrests in protest. The police exchanged glances. The situation was slipping away. On one side was the order, "Do not touch the passenger." On the other, the press demanded a sensation. The captain stepped forward, his voice shaking with fury. "Everyone leave the aircraft immediately. This is private property, and you are obstructing the crew's work." But no one listened. The reporters kept firing questions. "Do you run a corporation? Is it true you're tied to major deals? Do you own this aircraft?" The woman slowly turned her head, and the faintest smile touched her lips. Cameras instantly caught the gesture, and the reporters shouted even louder. "Did you see that? She smiled. That's an admission." Live stream comments exploded. "She's definitely hiding something. Look how calm she is. No ordinary person would act like this. She's clearly part of the elite." The passengers no longer stayed seated. Half of them leaned forward, trying to glimpse her. The other half shouted for everyone to leave her alone. Some even shoved at reporters, demanding they get out. One reporter, nearly falling, thrust his microphone right at her face and yelled, "Say something! The world wants the truth." And then the unexpected happened. The woman slowly lifted her hand and gently pushed the microphone aside. She remained silent, but her gesture was so firm, so assured, that even the loudest voices went quiet for a second. That silence was louder than the shouting. The reporters froze for a heartbeat, then fired off new questions. "Why won't you speak? Who ordered you untouchable? Is this political, business, government?" But she lowered her hand and returned to stillness. The police, realizing the chaos was uncontrollable, tried to push the journalists back toward the exit. But not before the cameras had captured dozens of shots images that within minutes would headline the world's news. The passengers split again. "If the company protects her, then she must own it," shouted some. "This is just PR, a hoax. It's too theatrical," countered others. And in between, she remained, calm, unmoved, as if she knew this was only the first act of a far greater drama. The cabin shimmered with camera flashes, microphones stretched closer, passengers shouted accusations and defenses. It felt as if the space would burst from the tension at any moment. Yet she remained silent. Her silence had become unbearable. Every gesture, every slight movement carried more weight than the crowd's shouts. Then, after long minutes of complete composure, the woman slowly turned her head toward the nearest journalist. Instantly, the cabin fell into silence. "You want to know the truth?" she said softly, but clearly. It was like an electric current ran through the cabin. Reporters pushed forward, passengers craned their necks, phones shot higher. "Yes!" Dozens of voices cried at once. "Tell us!" She paused, her gaze sweeping across the crowd. She didn't single anyone out, yet everyone who met her eyes felt as if she looked straight at them. "The truth is," she continued, "you've already made your choice." Her words hung in the air like the toll of a bell. "What choice?" a reporter shouted. "What do you mean?" the flight attendant cried. "Speak plainly," demanded the man in the checkered shirt. But she said nothing more. She leaned back into her seat and fell silent again. The cabin erupted. "It's a confession!" some screamed. "They're empty words. She's just playing with us." Others argued. The blogger, streaming wildly, gushed, "Guys, did you hear that? She said we've made our choice. What does it mean? Comment now!" And comments poured in like an avalanche. "She means racism. It's a political statement. The choice is our reaction. We showed who we are. She speaks in riddles, like she knows the future." The senior flight attendant, pale and agitated, yelled, "Enough of these games. You are obliged to identify yourself." But even the captain now hesitated. His face was stone, yet doubt flickered in his eyes. He understood perfectly every word the woman spoke, and every silence only fueled the chaos. Passengers quarrelled harder than ever. Some swore she was prophetic. Others called it a provocation. In the aisle, another scuffle broke out. Someone shoved a neighbour. Someone snatched another's phone. The police tried to restore order, but looked bewildered themselves. "We need a decision," one officer told the captain. "We can't keep the plane under siege." "There is no decision," the captain replied. "We have orders from above not to touch her." Those words were picked up instantly. Then she really is important. It's all bought off. We'll never know the truth. All the while, the woman sat unmoving, and her short phrase continued to echo in everyone's mind. "You've already made your choice." The girl with the phone murmured. "She means whether we defended or condemned her. It's a test." "A test?" the man beside her repeated. "You think we're being tested? Isn't it obvious?" The man in the suit broke in. "This is a trial, and we've already shown who we are." The cabin buzzed again, louder than before. The more they argued, the stronger the feeling grew that this mysterious woman truly knew more than she revealed. Journalists kept shouting questions. "What choice do you mean? Who are you? Why is the airline protecting you?" She gave no answer. Her eyes were fixed far away, untouched by the noise and camera flashes. But those 13 words she had spoken had already become a viral phrase. In the live stream, thousands of identical comments appeared. "You've already made your choice. You've already made your choice. You've already made your choice." The words had become a slogan, spreading far beyond the cabin of the plane. And now no one knew. Was it a threat, a warning, or a hint at her true identity? The airplane cabin resembled a besieged fortress. People shouted at one another. Cameras flashed non-stop, and the live stream counter showed 35 million viewers. The world held its breath, watching. At the center of the chaos, she sat calmly, as though the storm around her did not touch her at all. Her short phrase, "You've already made your choice," echoed in every mind. Some heard reproach, others a threat, still others a warning. Journalists closed in on her again. One, trembling with excitement, dared to ask, "Madam, tell us your name. The world has the right to know." The crowd froze. Even the noise of quarrels fell silent. The woman slowly rose from her seat. The movement was so dignified that even her opponents involuntarily went quiet. She scanned the cabin, her gaze lingering on each flight attendants, police officers, journalists, passengers. Her eyes were cold, not with anger, but with piercing clarity. And then she spoke. "My name you already know. This aircraft is mine." A second of stunned silence. Then came the outcry. "What? She? The owner? That's impossible." The senior flight attendant turned pale, the blood draining from her face. "That's a lie," she stammered, lips trembling. "That can't be." The woman did not raise her voice, but each word carried the weight of a verdict. "This plane belongs to my airline, and each of you is a passenger on my aircraft." The uproar was so overwhelming that the captain clutched his head. Passengers screamed, some collapsing back into seats, others shouting, "You're lying! Prove it!" The woman reached out her hand. A stunned journalist almost automatically passed her the microphone. She pressed the button on the intercom, and her voice filled the cabin, echoing even in the cockpit. "This is my company. This is my plane. And everything that happened here has become a public trial." At once, passengers' phones buzzed with notifications. Dozens lit up with breaking news. Headlines spread across the screens. "Scandal in the sky. Airline owner targeted on her own plane." The crowd erupted in disbelief. The man in the suit, who had first suspected the truth, shook his head. "I warned you." The senior flight attendant staggered, her face twisted in horror and despair. This is impossible," she whispered. We didn't know." The woman turned to her slowly. You knew enough, but you made your choice. Her words were quieter than the crowd's noise, yet so powerful that the flight attendant covered her face with her hands. The captain stepped forward. His rigid posture collapsed, his voice trembling. Forgive us. We had no right. You had the right, the woman interrupted, but not the wisdom. Passengers, grasping the scale of what had happened, filmed frantically. The live stream counter passed 40 million. Comments exploded. Unbelievable twist. She's the owner. Fire the entire crew. A historic moment. The police lowered their hands. One officer removed his cap and bowed slightly to her. We didn't know. Forgive us. She nodded, but said nothing. Journalists shouted over one another. What will happen to the crew? Why were you silent for so long? Why did you stage this experiment? The woman sat back down and, without looking at the cameras, said, You will get your answers later. For now. Learn to look in the mirror. Today, the whole world saw who you are. Those words became the final point. The cabin roared again, but not in hostility, rather, in shock. Each person understood. They had become part of a story that would be remembered for years. And outside, the plane still stood on the runway, surrounded by cameras, police cars, and hundreds of eyes. The runway was lit by headlights and camera flashes. The aircraft stood motionless, like a giant stage on which a global drama was unfolding. Inside the cabin, silence reigned. After the woman's words that the plane belonged to her, both passengers and crew seemed struck speechless. The silence was broken by a voice over the intercom. Dear passengers, thank you for your patience. By order of the airline's leadership, the crew of this flight is relieved of duty. The words landed like thunder. The senior flight attendant jumped to her feet, her eyes darting frantically. What? No! This is a mistake! We were just following protocol. You were following prejudice, the dispatcher's cold voice replied. And the whole world witnessed it. The passengers murmured. Some applauded, others shouted, Shame! While many filmed close-ups of the crew's reaction. The steward who had shoved the woman turned pale. He stammered, I didn't know. We thought... You thought, the man in the suit cut in, that you had the right to humiliate someone just for their skin color. Applause broke out in the cabin, followed by cries of, That's right! The woman, still calm, rose and walked to the middle of the aisle. No one dared block her path. Cameras tracked her every step. This flight will be your last in uniform, she told the crew. Not because I am vengeful, but because trust is something you cannot afford to lose. The senior flight attendant dropped to her knees in the aisle. Forgive us. We didn't know you were... You knew enough, the woman interrupted. You knew I was a passenger. That should have been enough to show respect. Her words triggered another wave of applause. Even those who had supported the crew now lowered their eyes. The captain stepped forward, his face ashen. I take full responsibility. I gave the orders. The woman looked at him evenly. Your orders reflected your beliefs. The consequences are yours too. He nodded, bowed his head, and stepped back. Journalists pushed in further, shouting questions over one another. Their cameras recorded every word, every gesture. The live stream audience had surpassed 50 million. Madam, what will happen to the crew? Is this final? Will you take legal action? She answered briefly, Their names are already written into history. Not by me, by you. The crowd erupted again. It sounded like a sentence, but also like a refusal of personal revenge. Passengers reacted in different ways. Some approached the woman and apologized. Others tried to hide their faces, knowing every word they had spoken was on camera. The girl with the phone sobbed, I'm sorry I didn't step in earlier. The woman nodded gently. What matters is that you did step in, and the world saw it. Meanwhile, news headlines flashed across passengers' phones. Crew fired after scandal. Onboard private jet. Airline owner subjected to racial discrimination on her own flight. Over 50 million watched live stream of incident. The senior flight attendant trembled, covering her face with her hands. Her career collapsed before millions of viewers. The steward sank to the floor, hands limp at his sides. Their colleagues stared off, lost for words. The woman returned to her seat by the window as if drawing a final line. There was no gloating or joy in her eyes, only steady resolve. "Respect is not a luxury," she said to the cabin. "It is the foundation, and if anyone forgets this, the world will remind them." Her words spread instantly across the live stream, turning into a viral quote. Within minutes, social media overflowed with posts repeating it. The plane remained on the runway, surrounded by cameras, police cars, and countless eyes. But inside the cabin, a new silence had fallen. Not the silence of fear, but of realization. And every person there understood. They had become part of a story that would change not only the fate of a few individuals, but the entire airline itself. The runway was flooded with headlights and camera flashes. The aircraft stood motionless, like a giant stage where a drama of global scale was unfolding. Inside the cabin, silence reigned. After the woman's declaration that the plane was hers, both passengers and crew seemed robbed of words. The silence was broken by a voice over the intercom. "Dear passengers, thank you for your patience. By decision of the airline's leadership, the crew of this flight is relieved of duty." The words struck like thunder. The senior flight attendant jumped up, her eyes wild. "What? No, this is a mistake. We were only following protocol." "You are following prejudice," the dispatcher's cold voice replied, and the whole world witnessed it. The passengers buzzed. Some applauded, some shouted, "Shame!" while others zoomed their cameras in on the crew's reaction. The steward who had shoved the woman turned pale. He tried to protest. I didn't know. We thought—" "You thought," the man in the suit cut in, "that you had the right to humiliate someone just because of their skin color." Applause filled the cabin, voices shouting, "That's right!" joining in. The woman, still calm, rose and walked to the middle of the aisle. No one dared stand in her way. Cameras tracked her every step. "This flight will be your last in uniform," she told the crew. "Not because I am vengeful, but because trust cannot be betrayed." The senior flight attendant collapsed to her knees in the aisle. "Forgive us. We didn't know you were—" "You knew enough," the woman interrupted. "You knew I was a passenger. That should have been enough to show respect." Her words unleashed a wave of applause. Even those who had supported the crew now lowered their eyes. The captain stepped forward, his face grey. "I take the blame. I gave the orders." The woman looked at him steadily. "Your orders reflected your beliefs, and so will the consequences." He nodded, lowered his head, and stepped aside. Journalists pressed forward, shouting questions. Their cameras recorded every word, every gesture. The live stream had surpassed 50 million viewers. "Madam, what will happen to the crew? Is this decision final? Will you sue?" She answered briefly, "Their names are already written into history, not by me, by you." The crowd erupted again. It sounded like judgment, and at the same time, like her refusal to take personal revenge. Passengers reacted in many ways. Some came forward to apologize. Others tried to hide their faces, knowing every word they had spoken was already recorded. The girl with the phone sobbed, "I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner." The woman nodded gently. "What matters is that you did, and the world saw it." Meanwhile, new headlines appeared on passengers' screens. Crew fired after scandal, onboard private jet. Airline owner, targeted by racial discrimination on her own flight. Live stream of scandal breaks, records with 50M plus viewers. The senior flight attendant trembled, covering her face with her hands. Her career collapsed in front of millions. The steward sat down on the floor, arms limp. Their colleagues looked away, at a loss. The woman returned to her seat by the window, as if to draw the final line. Her eyes held no gloating, no joy, only unshakable calm. Respect is not a privilege, she told the cabin. It is a right, and if anyone forgets this, the world will remind them. Her words spread instantly across the live stream, becoming a viral quote. Within an hour, the hashtag "Respect is a right" had become a worldwide trend. That same evening, the dismissed crew tried to defend themselves in interviews. But recordings of the live stream showing the steward shoving her and the flight attendant, accusing her of fraud, destroyed their claims. Public opinion demanded punishment. Passengers who had sided against her also came under scrutiny. Their names circulated online, and many issued public apologies, recording tearful video statements. The girl who had defended the woman and streamed the chaos awoke to overnight fame. Her broadcast shattered viewing records. Later, she would receive a personal letter of thanks. The next day, leading TV networks opened their broadcasts with the words, "The story aboard a private jet has changed the rules of the game." The airline released an official statement. A new code of conduct was introduced with anti-discrimination programs and a direct passenger hotline. The woman, however, vanished from the media. After stepping off the aircraft, she gave no interviews. Her silence was louder than all the headlines. She left the world only her words, now living their own life. Respect is not a privilege, it is a right. And when the plane took off again, this time with a new crew, the passengers who had witnessed that day knew. They hadn't just lived through a conflict. They had witnessed the beginning of change. The true ending of the story wasn't that some lost their jobs. The true ending was that the world, for the first time, saw itself in a mirror and could not look away.